To this day, Amazon's the same as when you used it 15 years ago. Why is that?
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream, Human Psychology and how technology and humans have to interact with one another and how our human behavior influences everything, right? From, especially at Nobody Studios, when we're building products, how we're connecting with customers, and how we're even leading our teams. And so at Nobody Studios, we're all about keeping it human. And so I'm excited to be having this conversation with our Chief Incubation Officer at Nobody Studios. Welcome back, Andy Walsh.
Hey, Sejal.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, guys.
Welcome. You're joining us right on cue because we had some technology issues. And I just asked Andy the first question about sort of like the topic that we really want to focus in on is this intersection, between technology and understanding human behavior. And so he was just going to give me his perspectives on how do we achieve that balance?
Yeah, for sure. And the thing that people need to keep front of mind is that technology right now is growing and changing at such a rapid pace, whereas human beings, as far as our physiology, psychology, genetics that make us who we are very much a slower burn. So like the technology changes, but there's things that we can count on with human beings every day. And if you think about from video to static images, sound, there's things that are deeply ingrained as part of our sensory experience that we have from sight to sound, as I said, and across those forums, we don't need to overthink it because it's a very well-trodden path. And there's ways that you can influence the ability to connect with someone, engage, retain them from a brand and product perspective, where technology actually potentially complicates it and actually makes it muddier and removes the ability to deeply engage. And I think that's the tension point we're seeing right now.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, Mark.
I think a lot of people that build products lose sight of the fact that they're a user, and the human psychology is within your own two ears, right? And that's not always true. Like I was just thinking about prepping for this call. When I started my career, I built some of the first internet products and websites ever, and nobody had any experience with that. Nobody knew what to expect. So we were just like guessing of what people would want and not want. And a lot of startups were, constantly changing UI and flows, trying to make it better and stuff. One of the things that I remember early on that is relevant to this topic is there were two sites that practically did not change for almost decades: Yahoo Finance and Amazon. And at the time, they were, some of the fastest growing, largest trafficked sites in the world, and Amazon still is. But it blew me away that for 8-9 years, like the exact design of Yahoo was the same. To this day, Amazon's the same as when you used it 15 years ago. Why is that? They have unlimited resources. Why is that? Because human psychology is nobody likes change. Why do people not switch from the iPhone to an Android? Because they don't want to learn a new thing, right? And so if you're changing navigation, if you're changing where things are, like people get used to it, and you're going to just piss off an entire group of your audience if you're trying to get clever and trying to make something prettier. And I just think back to that, whoever those people were that made those choices, they must have had a tremendous amount of discipline and vision to fight against all the people who wanted to make it cooler and sexier and use the latest technologies or use the latest design elements. And I just say kudos to that kind of vision to stick to your guns, not because that person probably didn't realize it could look better or even flow better, but because they were protecting the user and the psychology of the user. The last thing you want to do is frustrate a user. Now, fast forward to today. When you build a product, we all live on the internet and applications, right? Whether it be going to, schedule something with a doctor or buying something online or whatever you do, we all have immense amount of experience. So if you're designing a new product, you don't really have to overthink it. You and your design group and a few folks in your family circle, whatever, what feels good. You know what you're used to. You know what you would expect when you go to a website. And so man, I think if you just solve what we expect as a user to start, I think it's a lot easier to build good products today than it ever was, because we are all the perfect proxy customer.
Yeah. I love what you said. It's like, this was something too, like I spoke at a Disrupt HR event yesterday in San Francisco, and that was really the theme, Mark and Andy. It was about, like, I mean, literally, there were 6 different speakers, and then everybody talked about how technology is sort of going to impact every industry, and every sector. And the companies that succeed, is it going exactly to Mark, what you were saying, are not those that are going to be the ones with the most advanced technology. They're going to be the ones that really fully understand and respect that human element, right? And so technology is a starting point, but really about is how, is like what you said, Mark, is how do we solve human problems and improve their lives, right? That's what it really boils down to. So would love, you already started talking about this, Mark, but would love for both of you to maybe share a couple of products or examples where human-centric designs made significant impacts on products. I don't know who wants to go first.
I think Aura is an example of a product that I think it has a chance of being very complex because people aren't used to tracking. They're not used to interpreting or looking at data about their heart rate or their sleep or any of that stuff, right? And it could take a very clinical kind of feel or path. But I think they had to ship a product kind of like, the very first iPhone was shipped without a instruction manual. And it's one of my favorite things to remind people that the amount of crazy innovative design and simplicity you had to build into a very complex product, when before that, if you bought your BlackBerry, you'd expect your half-inch thick manual to come along with it. So the amount of advancement that had to take place for that first product to ship in the iPhone without a manual is remarkable. The Aura, the health ring, is another example. People aren't used to thinking about interpreting these, so they had to figure out how to ship this thing. It also doesn't come with a manual, and to be able to suddenly show the masses data and analytics, which I take for granted. I've done that half my career, but not everybody thinks that way, especially when it comes to their health. And so you have to show them insights, and you have to show them insights in a way that they can interpret it or take action upon it. And again, I think that should be the standard of everything. Amazon's a very complex design. They're just locked in because they have 100 million users or hundreds of millions of users. They're locked into that design. But there's so much navigation. There are so many options. There are so many different directions to go. And the only reason why it works is because we know it. Like, you could walk through your house with the lights off. You just know it, right? But that's not how to design products today. If you're building something from scratch and you weren't locked in because 100 million users were used to it, you want to have just the right next option at the right next step. You don't want to show them all the possible paths. Here's 182 things you can do in my application. No, these are the 4 things that 92% of the people use. And then if you click on one of those, then here's the next 12 things that are relevant to that path. And so it's called a zooming interface or a revealing interface. You just want to show the things that are relevant for the path this one goes to. So think of like tips of the iceberg versus here's everything under the ocean. That's overwhelming,
Yeah. Yeah. Andy, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that what Mark described, I think, is amazing as far as the UX experience. And I like from a human-centered design perspective, is like, how do you sort of become human? And I've been fascinated recently with Duolingo. And I think the human piece for me is, if I miss a day, just some of the language that it uses, it's like they're my friend and they're letting me down. And I think that the way that their tone works as far as how they want to be my friend to help me be the best version of myself when it comes to language, right through to their marketing and even the UX, in the sense of the gamification of it. It's something that we're familiar with. You go through levels, you progress, you get scores, there's bonuses. There's a lot of things there that allows you to sometimes have guilt for missing the experience, and they flirt with that line a little bit, but they do it in such a tongue-in-cheek way that kind of makes it feel like it's just your friend who's giving you a bit of shade. So for me, I love that combination of like communication, but also the UX experience.
Yeah. I think it makes sense, right? When you're from a design perspective, if you're making it human centric, that's also going to help you build a loyalty, right? When customers feel like they're a priority or they're being considered or they're seen or understood, they're going to stick around, right? And so that's why it's important to make that a priority. I love that you both highlighted that. So obviously we're talking about making sure that we make sure we keep that balance, right, between human centric design and innovation. And so what are some specific strategies that we're doing with some of our new codes at Nobody Studios, that people can, some strategies that we're using, or maybe some lessons that we've learned for other startups who are also looking at, making sure they keep it human centric?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, there's best practices, right? And again, like, I don't know, an example would be if you go to a website and you see a logo in the upper left-hand corner and you're navigating to other pages and you want to go back to the homepage. We've been taught over years to click on that logo and it's going to go back to the homepage, right? So you have to take into consideration what the user already expects because of what's standard, right? Those are best practices. Um, I also think you have to, we are about testing products early and getting people to play with the most rudimentary, prototypes. And you can get a lot of kinks worked out by not trying to, build it and they will come. Don't lock yourself in a corner being stealth and then go, voila, it's perfect. You probably spent way too much time and money. And that's when somebody can say, oh, I hate it. And you have to throw it all out. So I do think you have to have iterative input, along the way. I also think, you have to be asking yourself, what are some of the trends? What are some of the things that are happening right now that people are getting used to? And so that can be things like, what are the most popular apps today? There was a moment, I remember it years ago, when Snapchat came onto the scene, and then Instagram, and then, other things that, tens of millions of us are using every single day, but there's a certain thing that you're used to, right? Like you expect a certain thing, like swipe left, delete, right? There's certain things you expect in terms of, your activity. And then I also think, we ask, what is a emerging trend? I think the entire conversational AI is a good example. GPT became a thing. People started getting used to conversational AI. And I have talked to a lot of people who said everything is going that direction. That's the future of UI. I was a little contrarian. And I said, I think it's kind of gimmicky. I think that there's only certain things where conversation works. And there's a whole bunch of things where you just can get to it faster by navigating. And so I do think you're going to get to a hybrid versus, I think you don't want to just chase the trends, because I think you can be on the wrong side of history and have to backpedal a little bit. But yeah, those are just some of the things that come to mind when you ask the question.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it was either Andy or Nick that said something about, like, when we're building our MVP, right? We don't want to just ask what features do we need. We should be asking, how does this solve a real pain point for the user, right? And making sure that we include the users in that design process. And so I love that, I think it was either you or Nick that said that, Andy, but I think like Ovations is a great example, right? For us at the studio, of how we're also not afraid to pivot when we need to. If we learn something new that the audience needs, or we're willing to adapt. And I think that's important, to make sure that we're getting that feedback early, that we're willing to listen and learn from the humans, right? Not just the data. But yeah, Andy, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue. So we're literally right now with Ovations scoping version 2, and within that, there's things that you learn along the way, and the feedback from the speakers on that platform through to the customers using it, through the experience on the current side to best practices as far as current UX design, and that's sort of touching on what Mark said. There's native things that people know already just from using digital interfaces of all kind that allow our brains to learn quickly within that. But I think the tension, which is what you're talking about in there, is how far do you push technology for technology's sake? And like what Mark said, just to sort of close that point out, I look at it with something like Siri or any voice things. Like that technology now is what, 5-10 years old. And if you think about it, I don't think it's well adopted yet for at-home devices to on your cell phone when you're traveling. There's still something like if you're talking to your device ongoing, like it doesn't feel natural and it hasn't been adopted. So for Mark's point on the GBT, how that becomes more intuitive, like we're yet to see, but I don't think it's going to be a like replace everything situation. So I'm in the same camp as Mark there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would love to hear your perspectives, Andy. I know, in prior episodes, you've kind of talked about this too, where you said, as far as from a branding perspective, right? We've talked a little bit about design, but from a branding perspective, you've talked a lot about, making sure we're creating that sort of emotional connection that's resonating with people, right? And obviously for startups, especially when they're first getting started and probably throughout the whole journey, but branding is critical. And so I really wanted to make sure we touched on some of the psychological principles that are important for startups to consider when they're creating their brand.
Yeah, for sure. And there's within that, as far as the brand needs to be much bigger than the product in the sense of it can't just be a visual representation that something is familiar to people. It needs to have a personality. It needs to be like, it can be funny, it can be serious, it can be different things within that, but emotions are what connect with people. And I think that the brands that are successful today are the ones that are flirting with that. I say flirting deliberately because it's the ability to sort of have fun with what you're doing and not be scared of admitting that you did something wrong or something didn't work. It's not serious. So flirting for me is having a laugh, testing things out, and that test and learn part of what you're doing. So if you look at visual design as far as like the colors, and then you're looking at tone of voice and sort of how you talk about things, sound is another really important piece there as well. So if you think about a classic John Williams score in a movie like Jaws or E.T., etc., within that platform, they can tell a story through sound. And there's things that are thousands of years old that we've learned as far as certain sounds, etc. So all these things from a brand perspective, like they help make you differentiate yourself from the pack. So you can have the same product with the same features in market, and you can win that battle purely by having a brand that stands out from the rest for its own unique reason, and that's consistent in the way that you roll that out.
Yeah. I know, and you've talked about this again, I think on a couple different about building that deep emotional connection. And that's something that at Nobody Studios we prioritize, right? And so, Mark, can you share an example of how this, how do we take this into consideration? Maybe an example of how it's helped us drive growth for one of our new codes of building that deep emotional connection.
I mean, I think I'd use, the studio is probably the best example, right? I mean,
Mhm.
people have a visceral reaction around our brand. It's not uncommon to, get on a call and have someone say, "Oh, by the way, love your brand," right? It means something to people. I mean, the words themselves mean something, but the words combined with, people have seen us in the market, 3 or 4 years, our social, the way we talk, the things we talk about, how we talk about things, people feel like they know us before they already join a call, and they will say things like, "I've been watching you guys for years. I'm so glad to finally talk to you," whatever. But what they usually are picking up on is we try to be very genuine, transparent, humble, we're hard workers, we're visionaries. We don't take ourselves too seriously. And I think that comes across, and I think it makes us approachable. It makes us hopefully, the kind of place that people want to work with or invest with, or build with, and at least attracts the right people to our journey. If the way we talk and our brand doesn't resonate with somebody, we probably don't want them. Some people have a very specific brand and positioning out in the market, but it's very different than how the company actually is or how it operates. And I think we try to lead with our heart and try to lead with the values that we put on the site, and it comes across in conversations like this. And I think that's super important. That's where I think people get that emotional connection and are rooting for you, but they're also willing to roll up their sleeves and help and get involved. And that's an important part of our journey.
I think that's a great point, Mark. I think people don't just buy a product, right? They want to feel like they're a part of something bigger. And so I couldn't agree with you more. And I'll just add, I think it's important, and both of you have already said this, that it's easy to think what people want or what, who your audience is or who your target market is and what they want. But until they actually use it and you get to see it through their lens, you're just guessing. Right. So I know both of you have said this is start talking about it, be curious, get that feedback. That emotional buy-in is I think what really turns those customers into advocates, right? And we've seen that. Yeah. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I'll say there's a flip side. I mean, I loved that earlier Andy brought up language, right? Because I think that it's a big part of user experience we forget. So if you get to something and you can't figure something out, or it's not clear, or the answers aren't clear, you get frustrated, right? And I think that, I said earlier, it's easier to design good sites today than ever before because there's best practices and we all know what we're used to. The flip side of that is, and we've all been there, let's say you're looking for something that there's 10 places you could buy it, right? And you Google and you pick the one that just attracts you, but you get there and the site is messed up or confusing. You are so impatient. You just close that tab and go back to the next one. You don't give them the time of day, right? In the earlier days of the internet, we'd spend time talking, like navigating, maybe emailing customer support, asking for help. We have so little tolerance today for something that we consider stupid. Like, this is design stupid, or this isn't giving me the answer I want, or this button didn't work. These guys must be a bad company. Like, we're really judgmental and quick to give up. And I think it's the same as, like, I don't know, if you call customer support and you find out it's a robocall, or you get transferred overseas and no one understands you, you just hang up and you want to not do business with that company anymore. And so there's so many other touch points that create, that human-centric kind of approach, both to the interaction with the company, the brand, the perception. Technology is only a part of it. That I think is just super important. I think we can all relate to what I just described, getting really frustrated with the site and saying, screw this, there's 10 other people that sell the same thing. I'll find a better site. And I just think we always have to be aware of that.
Yeah, and one of the speakers during the panel had brought up the fact of, like, now everyone's incorporating, like Chat GPT sort of features on their websites. And how often do you go through and you're, like, answering all these questions just to get to, like, answer 20 for them to say, I don't have an answer for that? Like, are you ever going to go back there again? Probably
That's,
not,
that was
right?
kind of my point earlier, right? Like,
Yeah.
people think the GPT is the future. And it's like, well, it's for some things, but for other things, it's a very frustrating path to an answer.
Yeah. So understanding your user motivations is critical, obviously, right? So Andy, how are we going to make sure, that our products at the studio, that they align with those sort of deeper drivers, right? So tell us about sort of what your vision is for how we're going to be making sure we get this right from the beginning.
Yeah, and we've got a really buttoned up process that's called progressive, that's been talked about a lot. And within that, the way that it functions and being designed very specifically is taking category expertise to be able to move from stage to stage. And each of those leaders need to validate their certain area to make sure that that is, like, from their point of view, confident to be able to go to the next stage. And within that, there could be layers that go behind it that they're doing themselves. But from a team point of view, what we're trying to do is make sure that we all sort of understand codependencies. We know what things need to go forward, but that person is testing things and having a level of confidence. So to talk to a Valify, like right now, we've been in market with that for a few months. We're going through a stage at the moment where we're consolidating a range of feedback from partners, from customers, from people who are in the industry. And a lot of that information goes into the pot. It allows us to be able to move to the next stage with confidence and rigor, in that we've talked to everyone that we need to, plus used our team internally who have the right expertise and experience to get that combined point of view. And there sometimes may be tension in that, but we're able to have an equal forum where everyone has, a very objective point of view and constructive point of view to be able to move forward at pace.
Yeah. So what are some ways for, founders? What is something that they need to focus on, right, to make sure they deeply understand and connect with their customers? What are some ways that they should be doing?
There's quantitative and qualitative things in that, right? So on the quantitative side, like, if you're getting to a stage with product solution fit and you're starting to see increase in revenue, increase in customer base, unprompted referrals, there's, like, things that happen naturally in a business's growth that are key markers in getting traction. If you're seeing that happen outside of any sort of paid spend to be able to drive acquisition, within that, you're able to get a good sense that the product resonates, that it's connecting with folks, and that sort of momentum is growing, and that you are solving that problem that you talked to before. And then within the experience itself, if it's a tech product, then obviously you have a layer of data about where people come in, where they come from, what they're doing within the product itself, and then also where the exit point may be. If they get to a certain point on the journey and then disappear, you know that there's something there that hasn't worked for them. So understanding that UX and UI experience from a technical standpoint as well within that. And then that's combined with consumer feedback holistically.
Yeah, and I know we're almost at time, but I did have one more question that I wanted to ask. About the last question I wanted to ask was about cognitive biases, right, which can impact decision making at all levels of building the product, right from the get-go, and it could impact, obviously anybody that touches the design process, founders, teams, customers. We have to be aware of these cognitive biases and how they can impact those individuals. So how do we identify those? And what are we doing to, what are some ways that we can address those biases when we're developing and marketing our products?
I mean, I guess I would just say cognitive bias is the same, whether it be product or it be any kind of, verbal debate, right? I think you have to allow a psychologically safe place to challenge, and it's always this fine line, because you want designers to have a vision and you want them to, advocate for that vision. But some folks get really pigeonholed into a certain way of thinking, and they might do a certain type of product. Like if you hire someone that's designed for medical products, software sites for the last 20 years, and you ask them to do your e-commerce site, it's going to maybe look a certain way because of things they've been taught in the past and things that they've, in their mind, validated in the past works. But maybe those lessons are for a completely different use case and a completely different user type. And so those are the things you have to look for. I mean, I think the types of people you want to attract to the journey are people that are very open and flexible, or you hire people very typecast for that role. I'm developing a medical software product and I want to find someone who's done medical software products the last 20 years. That's okay. But if you try to bring somebody one from the other, there are a lot of talented people who can do that, but not everybody can. And so you have to, be aware of that and look for that. And if you see it going a certain way, before you go too far down the wrong rabbit hole, you definitely need to stop it, challenge it, see if that person can modify, or you're gonna have to switch the team up. I'm just using design as an example, but I think that's the main thing to look for.
Yeah, Andy, I would love to hear from you quickly on this one too. And I'm almost thinking we need to do a whole TMOAN session on this, because there's like 180, the last time I checked, different types of cognitive biases that have been identified, right? So it's a really deep topic to understand and dissect for people, so that they know that it's not just something that you can just spot. But I mean, if you know what cognitive biases are, you can also use that to your advantage, right? And knowing that that's how people are going to respond, or those shortcuts their brains are taking. But I'd love to hear from you, Andy, on this.
Yeah, I'll do a very short answer, and it came from I can't recall what VC it was, but it was a GP at a well-known VC fund that I read, and the statement was literally attached to what they look for in founders, and it was strong opinions weakly held. And as far as the ability to sort of know what you know what you don't know, but even if you do know something and someone else is challenging that, it's to ask questions and be curious, and not just stick to your guns and fight because that's what you feel you believe. It's understanding their point of view and having that open debate to be able to have something which is topical become a constructive conversation.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Mark and Andy, for these wonderful insights today. To everyone watching us, thank you for joining us. Sorry for the tech difficulties at the beginning, but we got here. And if you're excited about anything that we've talked about or the ideas we have, don't forget to follow Nobody Studios for more of our conversations. We're on everything's that all of our live streams are on our YouTube channel at Nobody Crowd. And if you've got any questions for Mark and Andy, just reach out to us. We'd be happy to answer those. And we want this to be interactive, right? So, don't forget that you can always put your chats and comments in these episodes as we go through, so that we can make sure we're answering your questions as well. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.